So this is our G1 frame. This has been built using 24 years of Nicolai's engineering and bike manufacturing experience in conjunction with Chris Porter from Geometron Bikes and Mojo Rising in the UK. And together, both companies have put all their knowledge and everything they possibly can into creating what we think is the best bike on the market. So we have 9 main features of the frame to talk about. Number 1 is the down tube. 2 is the custom EXT shock. 3 is the fully external cable routing. Number 4 is the quad seal bearings. 5 is the seat stay mutator. 6 is the threaded bottom bracket and ISCG mount. Number 7 is the chainstay mutator. 8 is the RADO dropout. And 9 is the brake mount. So the first thing to talk about with the G1 is geometry and sizing. We're not going to go too in depth here because our next tech session video will be much more in depth about the geometry. But the basics are we use a long reach, a short stem, slack head angle, steep seat angle, low bottom bracket and an adjustable chainstay for each size. There's 5 sizes in total from small to double extra large. We also offer a tailor-made option if you want something unique or extreme with the sizing. And the same frame can be used with 29-inch wheels or 27.5 or a hybrid mix of the two. When designing the G1 frame, durability was a big focus. We didn't want to build a lightweight carbon fibre race bike that might get replaced by a pro mechanic every 2 weeks. We wanted to make a tough, sturdy, durable bike for riders who want to ride enduro, downhill, bike parks, want to chuck it in the back of a shuttle van, throw it in a pickup, drop it on rocks, anything. This frame should withstand anything you can throw at it. One example of where we tried to increase durability on the G1 frame is we've taken the down tube from our DH bike. This increases the durability of the down tube against knocks from rocks or the ground. We can also use a downhill dual crown fork. And using the stronger tube also increases stiffness between the head tube and the bottom bracket, which we believe is the most important area to increase stiffness. The third and arguably one of the main features or the heart of the G1 is the EXT shock. This shock is made 100% made in Italy, and this shock has a few features that are unique to the G1. So one of the main features of the EXT shock is the use of spherical bearings in each eyelet instead of the normal DU bushing. The spherical bearings allow the shock to rotate slightly, so whatever load is coming through the frame from the trail, this allows the shock to just act stiction free and keep your back wheel on the ground. The second feature is this hydraulic bottom out control. So under really big impacts, we can tune the last part of the stroke to absorb really big impacts. The third feature of the shock is, even though it's a coil sprung shock, we also use a coil negative spring inside the shock, which gives the shock even better small bump sensitivity and compliance. So these 3 features together should give you superb small bump compliance, great bottom out resistance, stiction free movement and the usual benefits of a coil shock. This Storia V3 shock was actually developed in conjunction with Chris Porter from Geometron Bikes, who, as I said earlier, helped to develop this frame. And a number of the features are actually unique to Geometron and Nicolai, and they're not available to other companies. If you want to learn more about the shock, there's a great blog on the Geometron website. You can click the link here to go and learn more. And that really explains all the features of the shock and how it can really help you on the trail. As I just explained, this EXT Storia shock is unique and custom to the G1 frame, but that doesn't mean you can't use any other shock on the market. It's a completely standard length and uses standard mounting hardware. The mounting hardware at the rear shock eyelet in the top position gives you 162 millimeters of travel. If you take the bolt out and flip this chip over, you can get 175 millimeters of travel. The third feature to talk about is the cable routing, which has been designed to be as user-friendly and simple as possible. Aside from the stealth routing for the dropper post, all the cables can be run completely externally, which means if you need to change a gear cable, a derailleur, or a hydraulic disc brake, you can change them in a few minutes without having to remove any parts of the frame, the shock, or the wheels. There's a second option with the cables if you want it to look a little bit cleaner, to run underneath the shock and underneath this pivot. But we prefer just to run it outside. It's still clean and simple and keeps mechanicking time to a minimum. The final feature of the cable routing is that it's been designed to hold the cable or the brake hose off the frame. This is firstly to protect your paint, and secondly stops any rattling or rubbing noises. The fourth feature is the quad seal bearings, which Nicolai have been doing for over 10 years now. So we use a standard cartridge bearing, like nearly every bike on the market, which is a seal on each side. Plus, every pivot point uses O-rings on either side of the bearing to block out any water and dirt and keep the grease inside. This means that your bearing should last for years instead of months. The fifth feature of the G1 frame is the seat stay or the compression strut mutator. By changing this aluminium block, we can basically extend or shorten the length of this tube. There's a number of reasons for this. We can use it to adjust the travel, the geometry, or the wheel size. So this might sound overly complicated to some people, but it's pretty simple. We have standard settings from the factory, which are chosen on wheel size and frame size. But if you're a bike geek or you want to fiddle around with things or change wheel sizes, for example, you can ask us and we'll tell you which mutator you need to get a certain characteristic from your bike. So the next area to take a look at on the G1 is the bottom bracket area. The bottom bracket shell and the main pivot location is actually machined out of one piece of alloy, welded to the tubes on the front triangle. We stick with a standard 73mm BSA threaded bottom bracket, which is everyone's favourite, tried and tested. A unique feature to Nicolai in this area is the replaceable threaded inserts for the ISC G05 mount. With a normal frame, if you damage the inserts while fitting a chain device or a bash guard, or maybe you hit the bash guard into a rock really hard, you could damage the threads, damage the ISCG mount. If you do this, it's essentially unusable. With our frame, you can just push out the insert, push a new one in, and you're as good as new. So now we come to our second mutator system. This is on the CHAINSTAY. We currently have 3 options of these, which can be used to adjust the chainstay length from 446mm to 453 or to 458. This means we can get a good balance for each frame size. Not only is the mutator useful for adjusting the chainstay length, by only changing a small component instead of changing a much larger piece like the whole chainstay. It also helps to simplify the frame. So a normal frame might have bearings, seals, washers, an axle and a bolt. This actually puts all those pieces together into one unit. This cuts down on the number of frame pieces and also makes it simple to swap, to change out chainstay lengths if you want to try something different. So the eighth feature we'd like to talk about is the RADO, R-A-D-O. This stands for rear aligning dropout. Like all frames, they're built on a jig in the factory. They're welded, straightened and heat treated. So we're starting off with an almost perfectly straight frame. The icing on the cake is the RADO, and this helps the mechanics in the factory to align the rear wheel perfectly with the bottom bracket and the head tube and the front wheel, giving you a perfectly straight bike. This is done by vertical adjustment with the RADO. So we have 5 different options from -2, -1, 0, +1 and +2. This helps us to align the wheel vertically with the frame. So +2 will raise this side of the axle and twist the wheel vertically. The second part of the adjustment is done forwards and backwards. When these bolts are loose, the RADO can slide forwards and backwards, and this helps to align the wheel again along the line of the bike, so you should get a perfectly straight line from the front wheel through the head tube, the bottom bracket to the rear wheel. Because the setting on each RADO is unique to every frame, once it's set straight by the mechanics, they drill a hole through the frame and a pin is pushed in to hold it in place. So in the future, if you damage a dropout, you can replace it with the spare dropout that's provided with every frame. If you need another one after that, you can just check the number on the back, maybe it's -1. You can give us a call or an email, and then we can send you the correct mount, the correct RADO. Doing it like this means that whatever damage you do to the dropout, we can send you a new one, you put it on, it fits perfectly in place, and you have a perfectly straight frame every time. So to the 9th and final feature of the G1 frame, and this is a feature found on all our bikes. We use a post-mount brake mount, like most people, but normally the brake bolt threads through the brake caliper and directly into the frame. If you damage these threads, you might be looking at a new frame or some expensive repair work. With our frame, you can simply pop out the threaded barrel adjuster, pop a new one in, and your frame's as good as new. A feature like these threaded replaceable barrels for the brake mount, they might seem like a small feature that's not so important, but I think it's a great reflection of Nicolai's ethos and the way they like to build frames. The goal of this frame, and all of our frames, is to have a bike that's going to last you for 10 years. We offer 10-year spare parts availability. So in 10 years' time, if you break any part of this frame, you can call us or email us and order the part you need. And this goes from the brake barrels to the mutators to the replaceable ISCG inserts. Everything's replaceable. The only threads in the frame are in the bottom bracket, so there's really nothing that can go wrong. If you do cause some major damage to the frame, we can offer repairs or replacement parts, replacement mainframe, swing arm, chainstay. Or if your frame gets old and tired and maybe you want it refreshed, you can send it back to us. We can sandblast it, we can repaint it, re-anodize it, rebuild it with all new hardware, new bearings, new graphics. anything you want. A Nicolai, it's a bike for life. So for those of you that have made it through 10 minutes of my boring Birmingham monotone accent, we get into the bonus geek facts about the bike. The first one is these two rubber pads, which look identical, but the ultra tech nerdy engineers at Nicolai have actually made specific ones for each side, so that one won't fit there. But the specific right hand side one just fits in there perfectly. And that acts as a bit of extra force to hold your cables in when they're heading down towards the back of the bike. And then this cable guide clamps on and clamps the cable against that rubber, which should keep it quiet and stop it from moving. So once you put the rubber pad in there, you can take the cable guide, which has the lower part is shaped to run a dropper post cable into the down tube, and the top part is exactly the correct size for a gear cable. It also has this little tab here that fits into the gusset of the frame, so it can't rotate or move when it's being screwed in. And this is probably the nerdiest part of the bike. If you choose to run the cables underneath the shock and through this, between these gussets, it's a little bit more complicated to install or remove. But when you get to this part here, the nerds have even put in a different radius curve into each side of this block. One's for the 4mm gear cable and one's for a 5mm brake hose. And that block can fit under here. And again, that clamps the cables into the frame but lifts them off the alloy, so it won't scratch your paint or the anodizing, and they shouldn't rattle either. So the final hidden detail on this frame is in the MUTATOR area at the seat stay. And this follows along our idea of not having any threads in the frame, so if you do damage something, you can always replace it. So in this area, the seat stay itself is threaded, but also it has thread reducers put inside, which then receive the bolt. So if you do manage to damage the thread somehow, you can just remove this thread reducer, put a new one in, and again the frame's good as new.